name is Julianne Meyer. You are watching Own Your Wellness. And let me just say this. The guest today, I'm excited. I did some serious internet stalking. So I have vetted him. And I am excited for our conversation today. We met the other day via Zoom, and I'm excited to bring him here to join us today. So without further ado, Max Nijst, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Thank you for asking me to be here. I'm excited today, Julianne. So thank you for asking me to be here.
I'm pumped because I have been looking for like-minded individuals that want to share a different sort of view on recovery, a more open view, a more inclusive view than just AA and NA and or any A for that matter. And those types of groups. And I'm not, we'll get into this. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I wanted to hear, find somebody who is really helping other people, maybe not necessarily in that format. So why don't you tell us a bit more about you, yourself, your own wellness journey?
All right. Thank you, Julianne. So my name is Max Nijst. I was born and raised in Orange County, California. I can't say that I had like a traumatic childhood, right? I was surrounded by a lot of families. So I'm not your typical, right? Like I was abused or whatever. So I started drinking and using, right? It happened because, right? Like in high school, at least back when I was in high school, it was Friday night football games. And then where's the kegger parties, right? And that's what was, well, at least my life was all about, right? But I can pinpoint some events in my life that probably led to my addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, so I'll go back a little bit. When I was 10, almost 11 years old, my dad was back in the States, right? Him and my mom had divorced when I was 5 years old. And that was like the first time I had seen him in years. So what happened is it was about January, February, and he had to go back to the Philippines for work or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm 10, right? And he says, hey, I promise I'll be back for your birthday. And my birthday's this month. In about a week and a half, I'll turn 55. So, okay, I'm looking forward to my dad, right? Because, we had spent at least 2 months with my dad. It was kind of an exciting time for me back being a 10-year-old, right? Like my dad's back, right? I don't have to go to these father and son picnics and look at my friends enjoy the time with their dads, right? And then March came and went, right? And then April came, and then we got the news that my dad had died of a massive heart attack. So back as an 11-year-old, right, as I did the work and I realized that really, it was like, how dare you break your promise to me? Mm-hmm. I blocked out that he had a massive heart attack, but it was like, you just didn't want to come see me again and you broke your promise, right? So, and other things would happen as I got older, right, going through high school. And, I'll go fast forward going through high school, right? First, it was, experimental with marijuana, of course. And like I said, the backyard parties and drinking from a keg. And as I got into my junior and senior year, I didn't heed the red flags, as like for me, for instance, was everybody's gone home, the party's over, but yet I'm still driving around looking for people to party with. Right. And then people telling me, Max, it's like 3 a.m. You should probably go home. And I'm like, nah, let's go. I'm still right. So, it started getting bad, especially my senior year. I actually got in trouble when I was 17. Fast forward a little bit. Mom, right. So after a hard night of partying with my buddies after graduation, I started this habit of like going out Friday night, not coming home till Sunday, and then sleeping in till, Monday, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And my mom being, the breadwinner for most of my life, right, had really killer work ethic. This is now where I learned it from, right? Whether it was in my addiction or as a sober member of society, right? I work hard to do, right, what I have to do. And she comes into my room and she goes, this is not working for me. You're not going to do this every weekend. You have a couple choices. And I'm like, as I'm hungover looking at her, like, what are my choices? She says, here's your choices. You work full time. You can stay here. Or You can work part-time and go to school part-time. You can stay here, or you go to school full-time. And me being like not the best student ever was like, okay, what am I going to do? Right. So the next day rolls around and I get this bright idea, because back in the 80s when Top Gun came out, right?
Mhm.
And I'm watching Top Gun and I'm watching those commercials back then that said, this is not just a job, it's an adventure, right? And they would show the fleet on the ocean. I'm going, I'm going to be a pilot. Well, little did I know you had to be smart enough to go pass your math classes, right? But I ended up going to a recruiter and signed up for the Navy. And I just remember coming home the next day and I told my mom I'm going to the Navy. And she's like, what? You know, at first she didn't know what to say. And then she's like, okay. Right. And that kind of got me out of the frying pan, let's say, because it was getting bad, right? I wasn't just drinking and smoking marijuana. I was starting to experiment with, I wouldn't say, I was starting to do other things, like cocaine at the time was big in the 80s. And I just knew that if I didn't get out of that situation, it wasn't going to be pretty, right? Because now I already got mom telling me, and then my gut was going, yeah, you need to do something different. And excuse me. So I joined the Navy, right? And here's my adventure, right? So I go to boot camp in San Diego. I get my orders to go to A school, which is in Treasure Island, which is shut down now, but it's up by the bay, in the Bay Area. It was on the other side of the bay, off the Bay Bridge. Remember that earthquake that happened where that bridge, right? So I was that was after I had left, thank God, right? So I went to school there. But see, here's what happened when I get there, right? So I get to the school and they say, hey, you're free. Just put your stuff away. Go. We got this thing called Fleet Week. I'm like,
yep.
Right? So, right? So I go, right? All the officers are on the ship and we're in town on the piers. And guess who's playing a free concert? One of my favorites, Stevie Ray Vaughan, right?
Oh,
I'm 18 years old. Stevie Ray Vaughan is playing. There's all the beer you can drink. And I just thought I had died and gone to heaven. You know, I'm like, well, I can do 20 years of this. If this is what the Navy's about, I'm all in. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. I graduate top of my class for A school. And I get my orders, right? But so here's my thing, right? I just told you I didn't want to sit in the same place. So when they give you this sheet, it's called a dream sheet, and you fill it out, right? You pick like your top 3 ports you would like to be stationed at. So I put Spain, I put Portugal, and I think the closest to the States was Hawaii. Right. So I rip my orders open, I pull it out, and I look, and I just went like, you got to be kidding me. Long Beach, California, which is 20 minutes from my house. And I'm like, I'm already thinking to myself, this is not going to go down good, right? So I call my mom. I said, don't pack my room, because she was going to use it as her office. I said, I'm coming home. I got stationed in Long Beach. And she's all, what happened to your adventure? I said, I guess it's going to stay here in California, right? So, right. So that puts me back at home, right? And I'm only not even a year out of high school, right? And people are still doing the same thing. They're partying, and guess what? Right, I'm back into the frying pan. Long story short, I'm doing my time. I'm stationed on a ship in Long Beach, and right, I'm connecting with the old friends again, right? And I'm doing the same thing I did before, right? I'm drinking. Again, I'm doing, I end up getting in trouble in the Navy for testing positive for cocaine. Another, red flag that maybe it was just a one-time thing, but that was the only time in the Navy that I ever got in trouble, because at the time, back in 86, that's when they started their zero tolerance for anything.
Oh, okay.
Right.
You started it.
Yeah, so I got in trouble, right? Because here's what they would do. You would come back from, to work, right? And you would cross the bow, and on the other side of the bow was always 2 MPs, right? 2 MPs with their drug sniffing dogs.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, I never brought drugs on board the ship, but instead I just got caught for doing it. And and it really, it didn't phase me, right? I did my 45 days restriction and 45 days extra duty. And I remember telling my mom I had to do some like operation stuff. And, later down the line, she would think, you actually believe that you thought I believed that line, what you told me. And I said, right. Okay,
That's
Mom.
funny.
Right. So, but I do finish. I ended up hurting my ankle really bad. So I did 3.5 years out of my 4, and they let me go with an honorable discharge under medical conditions because I had tore my ankle up really bad.
Ooh.
So
opioids, woohoo!
But if I look back, right, if I would have had a different mindset, right, because I know that's what we talk about, getting better is changing our mindsets. I wish I had someone to look, that I knew that was into that back then, right? Because then maybe I would have changed the way I thought, because I probably would have did 20 years and got out when I was 40. But right, those challenges back then, as I like to call them, have shaped me to who I am today, right? And
exactly,
I really don't regret the choices I made, because it's molded me into the person who I am today, with being a husband and a father and a grandfather. But yeah, so during that time, though, when I got after my surgery and then they put me on the naval station for a while, I met who is now my ex-wife, and we got together, we were dating, we got married. And I remember, because even when I was on the naval station, right, because if you were 18, you could drink, right, back in those days, right, as long as you and a bunch of us, at lunch, of course, would have a liquid lunch and we would drink. Sometimes, I would get in trouble because my wife at the time would go, I could smell it. You shouldn't be driving, and I'm like,
yeah,
I got this, don't worry about it. Right. And it didn't slow me down, except when we found out we were having our first child, my son. Then it was like that. I remember that day when she came out of the doctors and she said, I'm pregnant. I remember I had a brand new pack of Marlboros. I threw it in the trash. I quit smoking that day. I was like,
wow.
I wasn't doing anything else because I was still, dabbling in other things. I quit that. And I didn't quit drinking at the time, but I slowed it down. Right. But then, fast forward, we have 3 kids total. The marriage is starting to fall apart. I'm starting to fall apart. And, right. So the drinking starts to take off again, like really bad. We get separated. And, I'm working for Xerox at the time. And I remember just like sitting there just going, this is not supposed to happen, right? Like, because I believed in my faith, right? And where if you get married, you're married for life and you work at it. Well, that didn't happen, of course, right? But I have no one to blame, right? And my part is, right, I used to lie about dumb things. Oh, you drank at work again today. No, I didn't. You're tripping. You know what I mean? Like, or whatever. It was just, definitely we all had our part, or we both had our parts in it, right? But then it got really bad. And then I'll never forget, I had gotten fired from that job, right? I'm living with Mom. And, the divorce had just gone through. And the only thing at that time holding me together was having my children on the weekends, right? Like that, because I would tell friends, don't come by. I have my kids. I don't want you guys, to disturb my child time. And then one day I came home from work and I get this, there's a message, on the old fashioned answering machines, right?
Yep.
You have 3 messages, right? So I listened to the messages, and then it's one of my ex going, hey, call me at this number. And it started with a 202. So just imagine where the brain's going, right? Because I know there's no 202 in California. And I'm like, so I call her up and she said, yeah, I'm in Nebraska and I'm not coming back. I have the kids. And I got to tell you, Julianne, that's like when that was one of the moments I can say where it was like fast as you can, downhill, no brakes, because I didn't care, right? At that moment, it was like you took away from me the only thing holding me together. Not to say I wouldn't get worse even if my kids were there, because we know how addiction works, right? It doesn't get better as you stay in it.
But the brakes were now gone.
The brakes are gone. There's no emergency brake.
Yep.
I can just, and I can remember just going like, how am I going to do this? And I had really no one to talk to. My mom was older, right? And she just like, she wanted to help me, but she didn't know how, if that made sense.
Exactly.
And then it began to spiral out of control, right? Like when the drinking stopped, I started hanging around old friends again who had stopped doing cocaine and were now doing meth, right? And at that time, my brother, God rest his soul, who had just gotten out of his first prison term, I always knew something was up with him, right? Because he would pop in and then he would vanish for days, right? Like,
yeah.
Right. And I'm like, wait a minute. So what led to, the drinking getting worse and then the meth use was, so my mom had this huge garage, right? You could literally park 4 cars in there. So I said,
Wow.
I'm going to build a room out of half of it, right? So you can only park 2 cars in here and the rest. So I could just tell people I got my own place, right? Like there goes my rational thing. Like I'll just tell them I have my own place, right? So as I was cleaning out that garage, I found a needle and a spoon. And that's when it clicked with me. I go, I know what he's doing, right?
Yep.
And so I completed that room, and I remember I called him over one night, and I had a bed in there, a couch with a little coffee table, my TV, and it was one door in, one door out. And I set it up like a commercial, right? Like the baggie was all pretty, right? The spoon was next to it. I mean, this is what my head was. And I made sure. And then I invited him over and he came over and he's like, what's going on? And I said, I pointed to it and he just looked at it and then gave me that look like, this is not going to go well, right? So I blocked him, from going out the door. And I said, you're going to teach me how to do that. And he said, no, I'm not. And I said, yes, you are. No, I'm not. I mean, we went back for 2 hours back and forth. And I told him what, my ex had done and taken the kids out. And he still was like, I don't want to do this. But okay. So he showed me how to do that. And that was my downfall. Because when I found that, it was like I didn't have to feel anymore.
Yeah.
Talk about numbing pain. Was alcohol here was starting not to work. Now I found that. So it was like both. Okay, I found my piece of heaven, as they say. And it just got progressively worse, and I went from, like I said, married with children, the white picket fence, the ideal life, to the streets in about a year. And my drug use just got worse. I couldn't do enough. I couldn't drink enough. From going from no, record to, starting to get in trouble with, misdemeanors and all kinds of, to mom just giving me that look, like, like I know what's going on, but I can't, and then it got worse. And I remember I got kicked out of the house a few times. And I remember the first time I got kicked out, right? I'm 20 something, almost 30. And it was just like the movies, Julianne. Remember she kicked me out. She said, don't even try to come in. And I remember walking around the neighborhood and it starts raining. It's just like, I mean, and I'm crying like a little baby, like, you got to be kidding me. It's really going to start raining on me.
In California.
Right? But that's when it would just make my thinking go like, okay, I'm going to be a really good drug user then. I'm going to hustle and I'm going to remain as high as I can because I don't want to feel this pain. I can't see my kids, right? Mom's disgusted with me. My friends, I pretty much have disappeared on that I grew up with, right? Now I'm hanging around a totally different crowd. And I don't know if you know where Beach Boulevard is by Knott's, but that by Knott's Berry Farm. So from the 91 to the 405, Beach Boulevard back then was a haven for a couple white supremacist gangs, all those seedy motels. I ended up, all the things I said I would never do, I ended up doing. And, the drug use got worse and worse. I didn't care if I lived or died. As one of my mentors put it, right, I was doing the suicide on the installment plan because every time I stuck a drug in my system or I was just too chicken and I didn't know what to do, right? And I'm getting in trouble with the law. I've got my first felony now. And so I'll fast forward to where things start to change, right? So I get in trouble. I have burned out already in my county time, right? I spent 5 days in LA County, and then the good sheriffs at Orange County Yard came and got me on day 5. And then I ended up, so my last time in jail was for a 6-month probation violation, right? And if you do good, you get out in 4. But I, unfortunately or fortunately for me, I had the same judge, or he was a commissioner at the time, and he would just look at me and go, "You have done nothing I've asked," right? And here's where, those moments in your life, you look back and you go, this is like either an awakening or, like the light goes on. Well, I was about 2 weeks in, and my mom comes to visit, and I'll never forget this. She sits across from the glass, right? Picks up the phone, and before I could say anything, she says, "Look, I love you, son, but you're no longer welcome at my home. If you come near my home, I'm going to call the police. If my
Wow.
neighbors see you, they're going to call the police. What are you going to do?" Right. And for the first time, instead of all those empty promises I gave her, I just looked at her and I said, I don't know. So she starts crying, and I'm like, wait a minute, why are you crying? You get to go home. I got to go back to the cell here. She told me, she says, that was like the best answer you ever gave me. Right. Because I had given her every promise in the world. I'll find kids so you could be grandma again. I'll get a job. I'll do whatever. And that began that process, right? So, and at that time, right, like looking at prison time, I was actually okay with it. Like 3 years, I was like, okay, I'm getting used to this, as they call it, 3 hots in a cot. I can do this, right? But I'm so far from reality about how to live like a normal life, or even a drug-free life. Like, that's the only thing I knew. Is like, okay, do whatever. And, and that judge or that commissioner goes, "You're not leaving my jail until I find a place. And here's your 2 places. I find you a place, right? Treatment, sober living, or prison. Those are your only 2 choices," right? And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So he was playing hardball, and I'm like, okay, but he'd give me one choice, and here's how I was back then. So he gives me this first choice, and I'm like, "No, Your Honor, I don't think you should send me there," right? I don't know if you've ever heard of the Phoenix House.
Yep.
Right. So that was my first choice. Back then, I heard they had this thing. I call it confrontational therapy, right? Where they stick you in the middle of a circle and they all bash you, and you're supposed to be like, I told you, I go, "Your Honor," I said, "I don't think you should send me there because I might have a new charge, after I hit somebody. I might be back in here." And he's like, "I'll see you next month." Right. So this is my whole process. So I'm in like 3-4 months now. I come back. Have you ever heard of the Hope House?
Yep, of course. Yep.
Right. So the next choice is, he says, "Hey, I think I'll send you to the Hope House." And I'm thinking about it. Right. But see, when we're back in the cells, right, we're all talking amongst each other. And some people are like, "Dude, you don't want to go there. They got a timeout bench. And you literally cannot move for hours. And you got to keep your hands on your knees, and you got to sit up straight." Excuse me. I said, "Your Honor." He's all, "What? Now what?" I said, "Timeout bench." I said, "Really?" I said, "That's something I would give my children." I said, "You send me there." I said, "I'll probably get my happy butt off that bench and keep walking, and I'll be back here again." And he sends me back again. So now I'm in month 4, almost in 5. And I get a new public defender, right? Because, well, the judge is getting sick of me, right? Because I'm liking this, because I have no idea what recovery's like, right? So all I'm thinking is confrontational therapy or timeout bench, right? So I'm like, I'm not digging any of that. Like, I'm not really seeing how I could recover or get better with any of those choices, right? And then I meet this guy who is locked up with me, and he says, "Hey, there's this place called Pacific Park." I mean, it's the Chapman House now, but back when I went, he says, "You got to do a group on Saturday, find a job, pay your rent, and stay sober, and they'll leave you alone." So I'm like thinking, I can do that.
Yeah.
Right. So I get this new public defender. I tell her about it, and she goes, "Okay, let me talk to the judge and probation and the DA," right? Because they're all together in the court I had to go to. You always had probation there. You always had the judge, and then the DA, so they're up there for like 20, 30 minutes. And I'm like, okay, this is not looking good. Right. She comes back because he's going to send you there, right? And the judge looks at probation to understand it's not probation approved, but you're okay with it. And probation's like, sure. So I come back, right? They say, as soon as there's a bed open, we'll send you, right? So I have to go back. And like I said, now I'm in month 5, almost 6. See, I almost did the whole thing. I finally go back. They have a place. And the judge says, yeah, I'll send you there, right? And I'm thinking 30, 60, 90 days, then I'll be good, right? And I can go back. I could please them just enough to get off my back, and then I'll be back to doing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, my first name is Stacy. He said, yes, Stacy. He goes, I'm sending you there, but I'm sending you there for a year. And if you slip 1 millimeter, I'm sending you to prison.
Wow.
Right. And I was like, part of me, though, like, I was like, okay, raise your hand and tell him, nah, that's not going to work. But I go, no, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to go, okay. Well, I ended up going to this place, right? It was in Tustin. And that's when I first, because I really never had any access or gone to any meetings, right? Whether we talked about NA or A, I heard about it, right? My oldest brother is going to be 40 years clean in NA this year.
Wow.
But back then it was like, I just heard about it because most of the time when I got sent, right, on what was it called? PC 1000, I never made it in. I would always see a friend and he would just say, hey, let's go in my car and we'd take off. And I never made it into a meeting. And when they put me on Prop 36, I went to do my admission, and the counselor or whatever was like, and I just said, look, don't waste your ink. I said, when I leave here, I go, I'm probably going to go get high. And that's where I was at my life, right? And the lady literally goes, I'm going to say a prayer for you. Okay, good luck, right? Like she knew, but she knew, it was like she knew that she couldn't tell me anything different to get me to stay.
Yeah.
It was just rather like, I know where you're at. I've probably been there. I hope you get done. And then like I said, I got in trouble for the last time, and that began my journey. And I remember, right, my first meeting ever. I walk in, right? Because when I got out of jail, Julianne, I literally lost everything. So all I had on me was a tank top, board shorts, and flip flops. It was close to winter time, and I'm like, okay. So, they went into the garage where they had people left their clothes. So I remember I had this sweatsuit on, right, and a beanie. I walk in, and there's this blonde lady. She's my friend now. She's about almost close to 30 years sober. But I remember her going, welcome, and hugging me, right? And I remember I did this, like, what?
Yep.
I looked at that, like, what are you doing? And then I'm checking my pockets, and my house manager goes, Max, you got no pockets. She doesn't want anything you got right now, so just go sit down. And that was my introduction to AA, right? And I'll always be grateful to AA, right? It started me on my journey to wellness, if you want to call it that. And I was, as we talked before, I was that hardcore in the beginning, right? If you don't do the 12 steps, you're going to die.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 right? Like, this is the only way. But I realized in my almost 20 years of being sober, there's other ways. And there's other ways that I've even worked on to keep growing as a human being, right? And not stay stuck in, right? I'm forever grateful for the fellowship because I have really good friends. Like my sponsor has been my sponsor for 19 years. Not once has ever told me you have to do this, right? It was always those, hey, I love you, but I suggest you do this, right? And right? And that's why my nickname my first year of sobriety after I'd relapsed 4 times was Idiot, right? Because I would just do dumb things and I'd stay sober, right? But I am forever grateful for that foundation, that living gave me, the structure that the meetings gave me, and those principles. I mean, there's a reason they say those principles could be, anybody can use them, right?
Exactly.
But like you and I have talked about, is that as I've grown, I realize like it's not just AA that has kept me sober. There's been other things.
Exactly. And on that note, we are going to go to a commercial break. I love that. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what you do and those other ways that we can stay sober and like change our mindset. All right. So we'll be back in just a minute. And for those of you who are watching us live, welcome to the show. So glad you were here. It is time for those commercials. So we're going to be back in just a moment. Welcome back, everyone. We are excited to be here today. Max, welcome back to the show. So glad you're here. Before the commercial break, we were talking about, well, you were sharing your story, and it was absolutely fascinating. And, you know, there's so many similarities and differences because everybody's different, but there's a lot of the same sort of through lines that people experience, you know. So for those watching, you are not alone. You know, we were talking, we barely touched on before the commercial break about how, you know, you are grateful for the rooms, as am I, because it really did help me, you know, start to create a new foundation. But you mentioned before the commercial as well that, you know, you've discovered other things and other ways to help yourself, well, not just stay sober, but live a more fulfilling life. So would you like to share a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. So that started, right? So I'll go back a little bit, and part of my story in recovery is like 6-7 years ago, like 3 days after I turned 13 years sober, my sister went past from Parkinson's. 8 months later, on my way to Minnesota, trying to finish up my bachelor's degree, my brother would commit suicide and lose his battle to addiction. And then 6 months to the day, on Thanksgiving Day, my mom would pass away. Right. And then the following Monday, I would put my daughter in treatment. And, you know, and as recently as 3 years ago, I lost a granddaughter at 3 months and a day old. And then my son almost died of a massive stroke because of his choices in addiction. Right. Wow. But what happened, like in that 6-7 years ago when I was in Minnesota, and I realized, right, yeah, the rooms are always there for me, right? But then there was like that part of me, I don't know if you can relate, but you go like, something's missing. I know there's something more I can do, right? And, you know, and part of my recovery story, right, in 5 years sober, I went into a severe depression, like really bad. Couldn't understand it, right? I had my own place. I had a girlfriend. I had my kids back in my life. I had a good job. And I'm like coming home every day and crawling into bed and in a fetal position and not wanting to live, you know, and I'm just like, I couldn't understand it. So I did the next best thing. I went to my sponsor. I said, what do I do? And he says, well, look, break out the book. You go, yeah, even us alcoholics seek outside help if we need to. And so, right, like, so I'm still doing the Western medicine. I get put on Wellbutrin, right, and it helps my depression immensely, and my PTSD, right. And I'm thinking, okay, this is okay. But here's what happens, right? So fast forward again, about 3-4 years ago, not, you know, in that time, like that stuff's not working anymore. And I can't figure out, I'm not depressed, but I'm, as people would put it, dude, like, Max, you're just kind of there, right? As my wife would say sometimes, she goes, you were just there. Like, you're not happy, but you're not sad, right? I'd look over at you and you're just like, meh.
Flatline.
So I realized in our research, her and I did, right, that the medication's only effective for a certain amount of time. Like after 10 years, it like starts losing its effectiveness, right? And that's what was happening with me. I went to my doctor and I said, look, doc, I want to come off this. I don't want to be on it anymore. I go, it's not helping. Of course, the question, why you feel it's just no, I just go, I don't feel anything. I just feel blah.
Yeah.
So I did it the right way. I slowly came off the medication. Now it's been 3 or 4 years and I've been completely off it and feel better than I ever have, right? Except for this little cold. I don't know if you could tell. But what that made me do back then is think about what else can I do, right, to become a better person, a better version of myself, right? I don't know if Andy Frisella and guys like that, Ed Milet, right, that always talk about mindset, and I started listening to this guy, Ryan Stewman, that always talks about being the best and most elite version of yourself, right? Through your, gratitude, you're taking care of yourself, your body wise, health wise, finances, family, and the people you hang around with. And I realized, like the good alcoholic and addict, and I don't like people, right? I don't like crowds, and I'm happy when I'm in my own environment doing my thing, right? But what I started to do, what I realized that would enhance, like I started practicing mindfulness. Right? Because I would get so upset with, I don't know about you, but when I first tried meditation, I always thought I had to be like that Buddhist monk that quieted my brain, right? That, I was Zen like, and then I realized when I did that research, even those Tibetan monks said, we don't quiet our brains that long. We're not that good, right? Because our brains, if you think about it, are the most powerful supercomputer on this earth, right? It's always going. And I'm sure you've done this before where your brain's started going before you even woke up, and you wake up, you're like, okay, brain, it's time for you to mellow out a little bit. So practicing mindfulness. And then what I started to get back into was physical, like trying to be physically fit and taking care, going on walks, hitting the gym, right? I found CrossFit, which I can't wait to get back to next Monday, but doing stuff like that, right? And then, of course, the foods I put into my body, right? I can't be fit and go to McDonald's and go get a Big Mac, right? So luckily for me, I was never raised like that. That was like always a treat. So I've never had a problem with eating like healthy, like vegetables. Right? But now as I'm going to be 55, I'm learning like what's best for me now, right? Like, because we know that I know a guy that just all he does is eat steaks. I'm like, how do you do that? I know I wouldn't. Right? Yeah, that's. And then there's the other end where it's like, I'm a vegan. I'm like, no, I'm not. I love my vegetables, but I got to have chicken or fish or right. So I would say about 3 years ago is when that process really kicked into high gear, because I started hanging around people that were talking about mindset. Right. When first I didn't understand what they were. What do you mean? I go, my mind's good. So my friends would go, no, Max, that's not what they're talking about. Right. Going to get ice cream, in the middle of the night. That's not a good mindset to have. Right. So I started reading more personal development books. Right. Because I got to be honest with you, Julianne, my only book that was personal development was the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right. I felt, or the Bible, that's all I needed. Right. And then I found out like there was so much more open to me when I started reading other people's, their journeys in wellness and, where they came from, right? Whether it's a David Goggins, right? Who's the extreme on one side, right? But I mean, he talks about your mind. You could do anything you want if you put your mind to it.
Yep.
Right. And then reading Jocko Willenick's book, Extreme Ownership, right? Getting back to like when something's going wrong, going, oh, it's Julianne's fault. I couldn't have done that. That's not my fault, right? Going, oh, I have to own, right? And when I realized that taking care of myself is my job, right? I can't,
Mhm.
it's not my wife's job. It's not, well, God rest her soul, my mom's job, right? It's
Mhm.
me, right? And then we talk about leaving a legacy. And I asked myself that one day. I was like, kind of legacy do I want to leave? Like, my dad died of a massive heart attack at 55. I've already beaten my uncles and my dad, so thank God for that, right? But I really asked, like, who am I and what do I want to do? And um, what do I want to leave as a legacy? And changing that mindset from like 12 steps are the only way to go to like opening my mind to different ideas, like
Mhm.
mindfulness, right? All that stuff, and exercise, and especially surrounding myself with good people. That has been
Yeah.
huge, right? Because I could go to the rooms and I don't, I don't have to tell you, but there's some meetings where you just walk out of there and you're like, oh, really? Yeah.
Ah,
And
I'm never
no
going
wonder,
back.
yeah, no wonder people want to drink right after a meeting, right? It's like, where's the solution?
Yeah,
And I'm not
exactly.
bashing, but we all experience, all of us in the program have experienced those meetings. It's just the way,
Mhm.
right?
Well, I mean, it's like that with anything too. And I know that's what you're saying, you got to take the good with the bad. But I just, that's the thing that we were talking about too. It's the principles and the steps of AA weren't invented, by them. It was invented by all these other personal development type of sources, and they brought it all together. So it's like, thank you. Thank you for introducing me to personal development.
Well, that's what they said. They said Dr. Bob and Bill W. just put it together so we could understand it. It's been around
Exactly.
thousands of years, right? So that's
Yeah.
why I tell, like, I have a private practice, and then even the clients I work with in the drug and treatment, realm,
Mhm.
what does your recovery look like? Right? I'm not that guy that goes, you better do the 12 steps or you're gonna die, right? Because we
Well,
want them to get better, right? So if you're
mhm.
already, they've already gone through that where people are telling them how to live, do this. I just try to open up their minds and go, there's whatever you do, the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold you accountable to it and make sure, right?
No, I like that idea too, and get them to learn to listen to themselves and trust themselves again. That was my best friend and I were talking the other day because we met when we were both working at a rehab together. That's how we met, and we were talking the other day about recovery and rehabs in particular. And in rehab, they really know how to tear you down, but there's not really the building back up process. I mean, there's not enough time. I mean, it's, there just isn't. It's supposed to be like a pair of AED paddles and you just, just starting your life again, but it's just the
Nope.
beginning.
Right. Exactly.
But, it's like, where do you go then? So I like the idea of, you asking them instead of it being like, oh, you have to do this, you need to do this. And what's fascinating is when I was in rehab, because I was so anti-AA when I went, and I remember one of the counselors saying, I never went to AA. I got sober through yoga and meditation. And then he said, but you have to go to AA. And I thought, okay, I'll go, because he said there's another way. So if he's saying that I should go, then I'm going to check it out. Made a huge difference. I never would have gone otherwise. So I appreciate that. We do need to go for one more quick commercial break. So we're going to be back in just a moment. And once again, it is that time. So commercial break, be right back. We'll see you in a moment. Thanks for watching us live.
When drug or alcohol addiction take over, things begin to disappear. Your friends, your family, and eventually, you. Recommended by Dr. Phil, New Method Wellness can help get your life back with individualized treatment plans for dual diagnosis clients. New Method Wellness provides the most highly credentialed treatment in a safe and welcome environment. Call New Method Wellness for your free consultation and ask about our national accreditations. Together, we can put the pieces back together.
Welcome back, everyone. We're almost out of time, but we do have a few minutes left. And let me bring back Max. Hold on a second. So something I've never noticed. I've watched the New Method Wellness commercial countless times. And it's the first time I ever thought, man, those people look really healthy for being in rehab.
I know, right?
That's not very accurate.
Yeah, they weren't at the detox zone, I guess.
Yeah, they were not in the detox house, nope. But anyway, we were talking about, other ways of, I don't know, either even getting sober and remaining sober. And also, I think the point, though, is not just not picking up. The
Right.
point is to actually experience life on life's terms, as they say, which, all the slogans used to drive me bananas, but they're so accurate. But anyway, what would you say, was your biggest takeaway from those types of meetings, AA, NA, all that?
Well, when I actually got introduced to AA, right? Because I never really made it at an NA meeting. Like I said, back, I wasn't done yet, right? But when I knew, and what happened for me, right? Even though I relapsed 4 times while I was in that facility, right? I always knew where I could go back to. I had gone to enough meetings where I knew people would welcome me with open arms, with no judgment. And that's what I was looking for, right? And maybe that was part of, like a little kid, right? I'm going to do this and see how you act, right? So I'll go relapse and I'm going to see if you really care about me, right? Or are you going to be that guy or that lady that goes, oh, you relapse, we can't talk with you, right? And I've seen that happen, right? And but my biggest takeaway, right, I have to say, is the man that I finally surrounded myself with, and some of the women who told me the truth no matter what, even if it hurt my feelings, right? And because they cared enough to do that. And I had one gentleman tell me that. He goes, Max, I'm always going to tell you the truth, even if it hurts your feelings. So tough, because I would be doing you a disservice if I just patted you on the butt and said, hey, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? Most of my friends and my sponsors said, someone does that, go run the other way, because that's not true.
Exactly.
Right. So when I finally got serious about being sober and wanting to be sober and change my life, the biggest takeaway I took was that listen to the similarities, right? I'm no one special. There's people that have worse stories than mine, but the common we have back then, this is what helped me, is that we had a common solution that we could work on together. Sponsor, right? He never, like I said, he wasn't like a hardcore, you got to do it my way or the highway. He let me have my journey, even those 4 relapses. And when I knew what happened was, when I took my year, his wife took me aside and said, I've never seen that man cry until you relapsed that last time. And he thought you weren't going to make it back. And I knew then, I was like, okay, this guy's serious about helping me, and I get choked up when I think about that. And right. And it's helped me become a better father, a better husband, right? Because it has opened my eyes and my ears to other methods of getting and staying sober, right? Because now I know Max's way is not the only way, right? I'm not the inventor of AA, but I'm not the inventor of other things either. And if I can throw things into a basket and let a client pick what he likes or she likes best, the chances of success are better than me telling them how to do something, or you have to do this.
Well, when was the last time anybody loved to be told what to do anyway? Especially an addict.
Yeah, right. Especially us, right? You tell me what to do, I want to do the opposite. Right?
I know. You want me to what? F you.
Exactly, right? So the biggest takeaway again is that, and I learned to be more empathetic and more compassionate, not only with the people around me, but with myself. And that's what I took away from it.
I love that. We have about 3 minutes left. So I'm curious if there is anything else that you'd love to share with the audience that maybe you haven't mentioned, or maybe even reiterate something that's important.
Yeah, if there's one thing I could like hit home with, right? And I shared with you all the tragedies that I experienced, right? And here's the thing, it's not just AA or NA, it's the people you surround yourself with. If I hadn't done that during those times, I may not be sitting here talking to Julianne, right? So find your tribe. And if it's getting sober is what you're doing, don't do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. There's people out there that have been in your shoes that will show you how to get and stay sober or clean, whatever you want to call it. But don't do it alone. Don't think you have to know it all and do it all in 1 week, right? Remember, it's a journey. Just take that first step. And the biggest thing I can say is it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. So don't be afraid to do that.
Oh, I love that. That is so true. Oh my goodness. It does. It's very courageous to do that. It's not weak. Not at all. I popped up your website a couple of times during the show. We have like a minute left, and I'm just curious, real quick, what can people find here?
So if they want to work on right now, one-on-one with me, right? I call it recovery coaching / counseling. I'm going to come up with some group stuff that everybody that can't afford to do the one-on-ones with me. You'll find in there though, like I do interventions, but here's the thing that I do. I don't just, someone calls me and says they've been drinking for the last 20 years and wants to quit. I have a nurse that I work with that will do that assessment for me. And if she finds that he needs to go to a detox or I'll always direct him in that direction first, and then we'll talk afterwards. But what I have found is a lot of people that I've worked with, not only in the treatment setting, but like some of my private clients, they're on that cusp, right? They don't need to go to treatment yet, but they don't want to go all the way back and fall backwards. So they start working with me. So I do, like I said, I let them find their path, and then I'm their accountability coach that says, this is what you told me. This is how we're going to do it. And, I'm the big hug or the kick in the butt, whatever you need. And we just try to figure out what your recovery is going to look like. And like I say on my website, I help those people not lose what they worked so hard to build. And
I love that. Well, Max, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been better than I hoped. So I appreciate you
for having me.
And thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you for letting me share it.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
You too.
And for those of you who are here, you will see us again later this week. Thank you so much. It is time for us to say goodbye. So until next time, stay sober.